scare you, no evil thing will. To see her is to take a sudden chill. Cruella, Cruella, the curl of her lip.
I'm back. Time to read the next chapter. Oh, how Pongo needed that drink. And now, stroll down to the pond with me, said the Colonel, gripping the handle of a little tin bucket in his teeth. You won't feel like trying to sleep anymore, just at present. Pongo felt he would never be able to sleep again. I blame myself for letting you in for this shock, said the Colonel as they went out into the early morning sunlight, because you can't blame the lieutenant. She's not a trained observer. When she told me the place was seething with Dalmatian puppies, I naturally thought she meant your puppies only. After all, 15 puppies can do quite a bit of seething. It was only yesterday, after I had made the folly my headquarters and could see over the wall, that I found out the true facts. Of course, I sent the news over yesterday's twilight barking, but couldn't reach you. How many puppies are there? Asked Pongo. Can't tell exactly, because they never keep still, but I'd say, counting yours, getting on for 100. 100? They had reached the pond. Have another drink, suggested the Colonel. Pongo gulped down some more water and then stared hopelessly at the sheepdog. Colonel, what am I going to do? Will your lady wife just rescue her own puppies? She may at first, said Pongo, but not when she realizes it would mean leaving all the others to certain death. Anyway, your pups aren't old enough for the journey, said the Colonel. I suppose you know that. Pongo did know it. His plan had been to let the puppies stay at Hell Hall until they were a little bigger, while he and Mrs. kept watch over them, ready to rescue them if danger threatened. He told the Colonel of this. And that's exactly what you must do, said the Colonel. But what about the other puppies? I shall spread the news of them throughout England. Other parents may come to the rescue. I doubt it after all this time, said Pongo. If the worst comes to the worst, would your pets give them a home? Pongo couldn't imagine the Dearleys refusing to help any dog, but getting on for 100. Still, the drawing room was very large. I don't believe they'd turn them away, he said, but, Colonel, I could never get the whole lot of them to London. Not as they are, of course. Every dog jack of them has to be trained. They must learn to march, to obey orders. I must teach the bigger ones how to forage. I wouldn't mind learning myself, said Pongo. Splendid. Now, how about trying your mouth at carrying this pail? That's a trick you ought to learn. No, hold your head farther out. Then the pail won't bang into your chest. Excellent. Pongo found that he could carry the bucket of water quite easily. His spirits were rising now. With this wonderful old Colonel to help him, he would rescue every puppy. He set the bucket down in the folly. You're looking better, said the Colonel. You may be able to sleep now. There's nothing more that you and your lady can do until it's dark. Then you shall meet your family. Meanwhile, I'll send in word that you've arrived. Something was puzzling Pongo. Colonel, why did Cruella steal so many Dalmatians? She can't want more than one Dalmatian for a coat. The sheepdog looked astonished. Surely you know her husband's a furrier. I understand she only married him for his furs. So that was it. Pongo had forgotten. But if the DeVilles planned to sell Dalmatian coats to the public, then Hell Hall was nothing less than a Dalmatian fur farm, and no Dalmatian would ever be safe unless Cruella's career came to an end. I must cope with that when I get back to London, thought Pongo grimly as he mounted the stairs. He found Mrs. stretched out on the bare boards by the window. She had watched until all the puppies had gone in, and then toppled into sleep. He pulled the straw around her and lay down very close to keep her warm. She did not stir. So I got interrupted by that man, so I'm going to try and pick up where I left off. His last waking thoughts were humble ones. He had expected the sheepdog to be some doddering old country gaffer. How much now he depended on this shrewd, kind old soldier. It was dark when the Colonel woke them. All still well with the pups, but no news of any other parents over the twilight barking. I sent word of your safe arrival, and good wishes to you came pouring in. All dogdom awaits to hear news from this quiet village. I've said you'll bark a few words yourself when you're finally rested. Willingly, said Pongo. Now, down we go to the dinner, said the Colonel. They went down and had an excellent meal of sausages, which the cat had collected during the day. She was away at the farm. The colonel said there would be hurt feelings if she did not join her pets at tea to drink a saucer of milk. And I must go back later because my young pet Tommy likes me there when he has his bath. So let's be moving. He rose and pushed open the window. The defenses of Hell Hall are childish, she says. What's the use of padlocked gates at the front when one can get in at the back through this folly? Pongo then saw that the folly had a door and a window opening into the grounds of Hell Hall, as well as a door and a window opening into the heath, and was, indeed, sort of a gatehouse. The colonel had originally entered through the window on the heath side. The door into the grounds was bolted on the Hell Hall side. So the colonel led Pongo and Mrs. through the window. Now we'll be cautious, he said. That window might blow shut, and there's no handle on the outside, and it might take some time to unbolt this door. He drew back the bolt on the door to the folly and pushed the door open and rolled the heavy stone against it. Now, if you should want to get out in a hurry, but I don't think you will, shouldn't wonder if you couldn't spend the night with your pups. Mrs. gasped with delight and began to ask questions. I'll explain as we go, said the colonel, starting towards Hell Hall. A full moon was rising above the black house. Colonel, what's that on the roof? Said Pongo. Surely it isn't television here. Oh, yes it is, said the colonel. And there's scarcely a cottage in the village that hasn't got it since electricity came. Most on the higher purchase, though there won't be much purchase here. I'm told the Baddens haven't paid anything for months. He then outlined his plans, and it soon appeared that the television played an important part in them. The Baden brothers were so fond of it that they could not bear any puppy to bark while it was on, and unless the puppies were warm, they barked like mad. The warmest room in the house was the kitchen, which is where the television was, so that's where the pups now lived, unless they were taking exercise in the stable yard. Some pups liked to watch television and some just slept. Anyway, none of them barked, so the Baddens could enjoy themselves in peace. All this the colonel had learned from Lucky during long barked conversations. The lad of yours is bright as a button, said the colonel. He's months ahead of his age. Pongo and Mrs. swelled with pride. The plan was that Lucky would bring his brothers and sisters out to the stable yard while the Baddens were watching television. But it will be too cold for them to stay out that long, said the colonel. And I don't see why you shouldn't go back into the kitchen with them. Lucky tells me there's no light except for the TV screen. So if you crunch down, you should be quite safe. Even if the Baddens do see you, they'll just think you're one of the two of the larger pups. But there's hardly any chance you will be seen, because Lucky tells me the Baddens stay glued to the TV until it ends, and then roll over and go to sleep. They've got mattresses on the kitchen floor. I see no reason why you shouldn't spend the night there. I'll call you at dawn, and you can get out before the Baddens awake. Pongo and Mrs. thought this was a wonderful idea. Can we sleep there every night? Asked Mrs. The colonel said he hoped so, and that it was at night that the pups would have to be drilled and trained for their march to London. Lucky says nothing wakes the Baddens, so I plan to come into the kitchen. I shall hold the classes there, and I will drill 10 pups at a time in the stable yard, but you two must spend a quiet night there first and report conditions to me. By now they were almost at the stable yard. Don't tell me any more now, Colonel, said Pongo. I'm too excited to take it in. Are you all right, Mrs.? For Mrs. was trembling. I can't believe I'm really going to see them, she said. The colonel opened the gate to the stable yard. Mrs. gave a soft moan and hurled herself across the yard. She had seen Lucky. There he stood at the back door waiting for them. And behind him, in the long dark passage leading to the kitchen, were all his brothers and sisters, who could describe what the mother and father felt during the next few minutes as they tried to cuddle 15 wagging, wriggling, licking puppies at once. Everyone tried to be quiet, but there were so many whimpers of bliss, so much happy snuffling, that the sheepdog got nervous. Will they hear in there? He asked Lucky. What, the Baddens? Said Lucky, rather indistinctly, because he had his mother's ear in his mouth. No, they've got their precious television on extra loud. Still, the colonel was relieved when the first joy of the meeting was over. Quiet now, said Pongo. Quiet as mice, said Mrs. But they were pleasantly surprised how quiet the pups instantly were. The only sound came from some dead leaves stirred by 15 lashing little tails. "Now still," said Lucky. All the tails stopped wagging. "I'm teaching them to obey orders," said Lucky to the colonel. Good boy, good boy. Let's see. I made you a corporal this afternoon, didn't I? I now make you a sergeant. If all goes well, you shall have your commission next week. Now I'm off to see my little pet Tommy have his bath." He told Pongo he would be back in a couple of hours. "Slip out and tell me what you think of things, or send the sergeant with a message." "Won't you come in and see the TV, sir?" said Lucky. "Not while the Baddens are awake," said the colonel. Even they couldn't mistake me for a Dalmatian. As soon as they had gone, Lucky had sent the other puppies to the kitchen, then took his father and mother in. "You must stay at the back until your eyes get used to the dark," he said. And indeed, it was dark. The only light came from the television screen and the kitchen fire, which were at opposite ends of the very large kitchen. And the walls and ceilings were painted dark red. They reflected no light. It was extremely warm, much warmer than one fire could have made it. This was because there was central heating. Cruella de Vil had put it in when she planned to live in the house. At last, Pongo and Mrs. found they could see fairly well, and it was a strange sight they saw. Only a few feet away from the television, two men lay sprawled out on old mattresses, their eyes fixed on the screen. Behind them were ranged row after row of puppies, small pups at the front, large pups at the back. Those who did not care for television were asleep around the kitchen fire. The hot red room was curiously cozy, though Pongo felt it was a bit like being inside a giant's mouth. Lucky whispered, "I thought we could settle Mother with the family, and then I could show you around a bit. All the pups wanted to get a glimpse of you. Father, you are going to rescue them all?" "I hope so," said Pongo earnestly, wondering more and more how he was going to manage it. "I told them you would, but they've been pretty nervous. I'll just send the word around that they can count on you." He whispered to a pup at the end of a row, and the word traveled over like wind over a cornfield. There was barely a sound that a human ear could have heard except for a couple of tail thumps instantly repressed. All knew they must not give away the fact that Pongo was in their midst, and when he went silently along the rows, there was scarcely any movement. But he could feel great waves of love and trust rolling towards him, and suddenly all the pups were real and living for him, not just a problem he had to face. He felt as if he were the father of them all, and he knew that he could never desert them. He felt a special sympathy for the big pups in the two back rows. Some of them were fully half-grown. Your young dogs rather than puppies. Lollopy creatures with clumsy feet. They made him remember his own not very far away youth. He wondered how long their skins would be safe from Cruella. Would she have the patience to wait much longer? Did the big pups know that danger grew closer every day? Something in their eyes told him they did, and many of them had been in this horrible place for months, without hope, until Lucky had spread the news that his father and mother were coming. Proud Lucky now taking his father along the rows of hero-worshipping pups. Blissfully happy, Mrs. Set, with her own children clustered about her. She had eyes only for them, but they were determined she should not miss the television. She had never seen it before. Mr. and Mrs. Dearly did not care for it and found it difficult to follow. The pups did not follow it completely, as they had not yet learned enough human words, but they liked the little moving figures and watched in perpetual hope of seeing dogs on the screen. "Can we have it when we get back home?" said the Cadpig. "Indeed you shall, my darling," said Mrs. Somehow the Dearlys must be made to buy a set. Pongo had now silently met all the pups. He told Lucky that he would like to have a good look at the Baddens, so Lucky took him a little way up the back staircase where they could be seen without being noticed. No one would have guessed that Saul and Jasper Badden were brothers. Saul was heavy and dark, and with a forehead so low that his bushy eyebrows often got tangled with his matted hair. Jasper was thin and fair, with chin so sharp and pointed that it had worn holes in all his shirts. Not that he had many. Both brothers looked very dirty. "They never change their awful old clothes," whispered Lucky, "and they never wash. I don't think they are real humans, Father. Is there such a thing as half-human?" Pongo could well believe it after seeing the Baddens, but he couldn't imagine what their non-human half was. It was no animal he had ever seen. Have they ill-treated any of you? He asked anxiously. No, they're too frightened of being bitten, said Lucky. They're terrible cowards. Some of the big pups did think of attacking them, but there seemed no way of getting out. And if they had killed the bad ones, there'd be no one to feed us. Oh, Father, how glad I am you've come. Pongo licked his son's ear. Pups, like boys, do not like fathers to be too sentimental. Mothers are different, but this was a very private moment. Then they went and sat with Mrs. and the family. It seemed strange that they could all be so peaceful right in the enemy's camp. Gradually, the Pongos, puppies, all fell asleep except Lucky, Patch, and the Cat-Pig. Lucky was not sleepy. Patch was, but stayed awake because the Cat-Pig was awake, and the Cat-Pig stayed awake because she was crazy about television. Many of the big pups, too, were lying down to sleep, stretching luxuriously, feeling for the first time since they had been imprisoned in Hell Hall that there was someone that they could rely on. Pongo had come, and Mrs. too. They had looked at her shyly, quite understanding that she must care for her own children first, but hoping she would have a little time for them later. Some of them could hardly remember their mother, but the younger pups could remember theirs and were not sleeping. Slowly, silently, they were inching their way toward Mrs. She had been watching television, beginning to get the hang of it with the Cat-Pig's help. Then some tiny sound close at hand brought her attention back to her family, but the sound had not come from her family. There were now nearly 30 puppies, not so very much bigger than her own, just feet away, all staring at her hopefully. Goodness, they're grubby, was her first thought. Didn't their mothers teach them to wash themselves? Then she felt a pang of pity. What mother had any of them had now? She smiled at all of them, and they wrinkled their little noses in a return smile. Then she looked beyond them to the larger pups. Some of them half-grown girls reminded her of herself at their age. So slim, so silly. They knew how to wash themselves, but there were many things they didn't know, many ways in which they needed a mother's advice. And suddenly, all the puppies were her puppies, and she was their mother. Just as Pongo had felt, he was their father. And indeed, the younger ones, creeping closer and closer to her, were now so mingled with her own that she could scarcely tell where her little family ended and her larger family began. Drowsiness had spread through the warm red room. Even the Baden brothers dozed. They did not much like the program that was on the television and wanted to be fresh for their very favorite program, which was due later. Even Mrs. slept a little, and knowing that Pongo would keep watch. At last, only 3 pairs of eyes were open. Pongo was wide awake, thinking and thinking. Lucky was wide awake, for he thought of himself as a sentry, who must not sleep on duty. And the Cat-Pig was wide awake, watching her lovely, lovely television. Suddenly there was a thunder of thumps at the front door. The sleeping pups woke in alarm. The Baden brothers lumbered to their feet and stumbled towards the door, but before they got there it had been flung open. Outside, against the moonlit sky, stood a figure in a long white cloak. It was Cruella de Vil. And that is the end of that chapter. That would have been chapter 11, I believe. Okay. So I will see you guys later, and we're going to go on to the next chapter, which is called Sudden Danger. Next time I see you. Bye.
Better beware. She's like a spider waiting